Oh my God, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream. We are so excited to have our friends joining us again. We've got Kayla Pop, we've got Professor Danny Shaw, and Camila from Casacha News. She's in Bolivia. It's winter there, but in the Northern Hemisphere, it's not winter. And so we are not mad about that. Welcome. We're here to talk about patriotism, foreign policy, class reductionism, being gay and hot on the internet. You know, that's what we do. I'm gonna let Eric take it away and go on a rant and tell you how we really feel about the state of the world, and then we're gonna get right into it.
Well, the topic for tonight is how imperialism impacts the American proletariat. And but before we get into that, why don't we do just a little introduction so people are familiar with everyone that's here. Why don't we start with Camila?
Oh, do you want me to introduce myself?
What?
Did you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah.
I thought you guys were going to introduce me. Okay. Well, I'm Camila. Or Camila. I grew up in the US, so I call myself Camila because everyone called me Camila. But it is Camila, and I'm Bolivia based, and I report on Latin America. Previously based in Quito, Caracas, and Havana. And my family's from El Salvador, and I just did a little Salvador, Nicaragua tour, and I'm back here in Bolivia. There's a lot going on here. But we also work on other projects apart from Calsashua News. So it's a busy time for us.
Thank you for taking the time to join us. Please give our viewers your social media handles so they can follow your excellent work. Please give Camila a follow.
Yeah, just next to my name is at Calsashua News, and you can follow me at Prensa Camila and Camila Press.
And then Kayla, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm Kayla Papuchet. I am in New York City, based in New York City. I am a member of the Pumas Collective. It is a Peruvian diaspora collective. We translate information and organize fundraisers to send money back to groups on the ground in Peru. I'm also a student and I am a housing court advocate. So I assist tenants in the housing court, fight evictions, and start cases against their landlord. I'm also a member of the Party of Communists USA.
Excellent. Where can people follow you on social media, my friend?
So on Twitter, you can follow me at Kayla Pop with an underscore, and it's the best place to find me.
Excellent. And also joining us is Professor Danny Shaw. Can you give us a rundown of what you're up to lately and where people can follow you on social media?
Yes, peace, comrades, revolutionary greetings from St. George's, Grenada. In the spirit of Maurice Bishop, the New Jewel movement, I'm here with comrades in Grenada. Perhaps a forgotten revolution for my generation, but certainly the generation before me learned incredible lessons from the 1979 to 1983 Grenadian Revolution. So greetings to Kayla, Camila, Red Lettuce. Thanks for putting this together. And I mean, today, what a fitting day with everything transpiring in Kabul, what's been going on with this U.S. media war against the Afghan people. So lots to jump into.
Absolutely, and we really appreciate all of you joining us tonight to discuss how imperialism impacts the American proletariat, because it's a topic that gets overlooked, which is why we have this ongoing series, because we often see the topic of imperialism only being referred to how our government underdevelops and destroys other countries, but not how imperialism is currently having the same impact in America, which is the center of global imperialism. We also have this series to combat the ridiculous claim made by the synthetic left and red libs who dare to say that American workers benefit from the system, We can look at the situation in Afghanistan as an example on how imperialism doesn't benefit American workers. Our government spent over $2 trillion illegally occupying and bombing the country. Meanwhile, infrastructure in America is crumbling. The police and security state is expanding. Living standards are decreasing. Majority of workers working paycheck to paycheck. Over 10 million children in America go hungry, and over 60,000 people die due to no health care. 40% of the homeless population have jobs. Working class people paying half of their income just on housing, and the fact that millions are about to lose their homes due to a pandemic is the direct result of imperialism. This clearly shows how imperialism is diametrically opposed to the interests of American workers. Both these conditions brings unprecedented amount of revolutionary potential among the American proletariat, which can bring to fruition a government that replaces the current dictatorship of the ruling elites and install a workers' government that works in the interest of the working class. So I think we can start this off by talking about basically what imperialism is and how do you all see it impacting American workers here at home, and what examples can you give? I guess we'll start with.
I'll go. I'll go. Just because, I work in the housing court. That's my job every single day, and I'm talking to people, and I've been working there for about 3 years. And actually, I got my job when I first got my position. I had just signed a lease after being homeless for 2 months. So like it was just crazy for me, getting into that job but really feeling it. But I work with people for the past 3 years every single day, and I listen to these stories, and sometimes it gets very heavy because you're talking to people who are fighting for the most basic thing. And that's housing, that's shelter. Having been homeless, I can see how you really can't live without it. Like it takes physical, emotional, mental turmoil. It's a disaster. And so in New York City, I live in one of the richest cities in this country, and it just makes no sense as to why we have so much wealth, so much real estate, so much infrastructure in the city. And you go to Penn Station, you can go down the block from my building and see homeless people everywhere, trash everywhere. It's people sleeping on the trains. It's a disaster. And you can't separate imperialism from what this is a result of that, because we understand that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and this is all a product of capitalism. Now when we talk about the synthetic left and the rad libs, and they'll say things like, okay, well, the US left, or the US rather, the working class benefits from imperialism, and they'll compare the fact that we maybe have better trash pickup than places in my family's country in Peru. I'll go to my family's neighborhood and there's more trash on the streets and there's less pickup services, or there's some houses don't have roofs, some people live in shanty towns, and this is an objective fact, and this is truth, that there is better infrastructure here, there's better development. But to say that this is a benefit to the working class in and of itself is not a net benefit, because like Jorge Arias, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Venezuela, what he says it best, is that the first victim of American imperialism is the American people. Without us, they would not be able to be imperialists. They use the labor from on our backs to go ahead and steal from us, take those riches, take those resources, and go and steal from people in the third world. And they only need us to so much reproduce ourselves, and they're barely even doing that. We're barely being able to reproduce ourselves, and which is why you're seeing the empire in crisis. I talk to people in New York City, one of the richest cities in one of the richest states in the country, where there's 900,000 households, which covers millions and millions of people that are in housing court right now just because of the pandemic, just because they're not able to, pay off their rent or their landlord just wants them gone since they've been fighting, and landlords is a landlord. They have their rights are protected by the state through and through. The Supreme Court actually also just struck down our eviction moratorium, so we don't even have any of that. It's an absolute crisis what's going on in my own city, in my state. I'm here, working on the hotlines, trying to solve like 30 people's problems every single day, but it never feels like it's enough, because it's never going to be enough as long as we're living under capitalism, as long as we're living under imperialism. One of the things I think is funny is how there was a movement to cancel the rent. I mean, throughout the whole country, but in New York as well. We had a cancel rent bill that, like, the DSA types of folks wrote out a bill, and they proposed this where we cancel the rent, and landlords who faced hardship, so if the landlord has to pay their mortgage or has to pay property taxes, utilities, that they can apply for assistance, and the government would subsidize them, obviously with our tax dollars, but they would subsidize them with that. But instead, our politicians said, no, instead, what we're going to do is make the tenants apply for the back rent that they owe. The difference is millions and millions of dollars. If a landlord only has to apply for just the amount of money that they lost during COVID, which is maybe, like, let's say for an example, $50,000, but a tenant owes now $70,000 because of that back rent, they're obviously making a profit. And it doesn't make sense to us as working class people why the government is willing to give out more money, and it's our money, but get willing to pay out more money than if they just canceled rent, and they'd be actually saving millions and millions of dollars. But it makes sense when you think about it that we're not the government's forethought. We're the afterthought. We're not even a thought. We're their stepping stool. We're their base. They take our money and give out the money to our money to other rich people, and they're keeping everybody themselves enriched. And so you got to think about it. Is there a net benefit? Obviously, and nobody can deny this, that conditions are different when you go into the first world, when you go into the West. They're going to be different. But that's also because there has to be a different layer of who is reproducing themselves. We have these exploited workers, and they're designated for this kind of standard of living. And then we have these exploited workers, and they're designated for this kind of standard of living. But it is crumbling. And because capitalism is unsustainable, we need to move on to the next economic mode. Capitalism developed, and it was progressive in comparison to feudalism. But at the end of the day, we all understand, and we should understand, that we need socialism to get into the next stage of human development, to raise people out of poverty. And so we can't say that imperialism benefits people if we understand that capitalism is a plague to humans everywhere. It just doesn't make sense, or you just don't understand what imperialism is. And I live in New York City. I live in the heart of capitalism in this country, and there's just no way that you can tell me that there's a net benefit to this. Because if you say that there's a net benefit to capitalism, there's a net benefit to imperialism, then you sound like the Republicans. You sound like the Cato Institute. Then why should we fight for socialism? I don't get it. If we're benefiting, it doesn't make any sense.
You sound like the Cato Institute. I love that. I mean, yeah, like they really do sound like conservative right wingers. I mean, they are. The liberals are part of the right wing. They just think they're left, but they're just the left side of the plane, Professor Danny Shaw, could you answer the same question and tell us, what's imperialism, who's benefiting from imperialism, and how in part of the global proletariat, how are American workers being harmed from imperialism?
Yeah, so important to understand these truths. It would be interesting to give a quiz to everybody, and it's a simple quiz. What is imperialism? A, the U.S. presence in the Middle East. B, the Soviet intervention in 1979 in Afghanistan. C, the Roman Empire and its expansion. D, all of the above. So if people were taking that quiz at home, we'll do a 10-second pause. You can pause and put your answer and then come back to the live. And the answer would be A. There's a certain scientific criteria, as Lenin laid out in the 1915 pamphlet, short book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. That's definitely a classic work we should keep coming back to. So to understand imperialism, taking the example of the U.S. and Afghanistan and Iraq and what they did to Libya, what they do every day to Palestine, to Syria, what they do to Iran. It's the extraction of natural resources. It's the extraction of labor power, of surplus value. It's the control of the banks, and it's the export of capital. So there's these fundamental criteria, right? And that's why they hate Iran. That's why they hate Palestine. That's why there's an ongoing war against Nicaragua, against Cuba, against Grenada from 79 to 83. And then you never heard about Grenada because Grenada was tucked back into the sphere of influence of the US. So any country from Afghanistan to China to Russia to Zimbabwe to Pyongyang, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, who dares to defy US unipolarity, finds themselves in the crosshairs of the most sophisticated, potent military machine in human history. But in the words of Bertolt Brecht, paraphrasing one of his very clever, insightful poems, look at this massive, sophisticated tank. There's only one problem. It takes a thinking human being to drive it. So, of course, today, it could not be more apparent. 12 more U.S. soldiers dead in Afghanistan, the most deadly day for the U.S. since 9/11. At least in terms of Afghanistan. I'm sure in the Middle East there had to be in Iraq. But that's what CNN is repeating ad nauseum. And who's doing the dying? How many more troops were injured today? I think it was 18. Never mind the Afghan civilians and Afghan people in general. So imperialism is this battle of ideas. It's this American dreaming. It's all this God bless America nauseous rhetoric that my family and the media and all the social institutions of this society subjected us to, whether we grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts, Phoenix, New York City, or the Bronx, one of the 5 boroughs. All day, every day, American dreaming, ethnocentric, ethno-American, American-centric, and that's what we're trying to really title the really clever the title, Proletarian patriotism, and party patriotism is in a revolutionary party, because do we believe in the Democrats? No. Do we believe in the Republicans? Clearly not. So who can we believe in?
Exactly. Thank you, Danny, very much. Camila, we'll move on to you now with the same questions.
Hey, yeah, so I'm trying to tie it to like stuff that I'm covering right now, and I'm working with an organization, La Via Campesina, which is one of the largest, most likely the largest social movements in the world with 200 million members. And La Via Campesina has a section in the United States as well. La Via Campesina, North America it is. And of course, there are people, there are small farmers in the United States still. And I think that, what's going on, what happened during the first wave of COVID just shows us how sort of volatile things can be. And it's just kind of a sample of how, food is subject to price shocks, to scarcity, and that US workers are not kind of immune to these sorts of things that we've experienced and seen firsthand in sanctioned countries and in just, underdeveloped countries of the global South. And it's really, this project that we're working on is this September, the United Nations will be holding the Food System Summit, in which the UN and its Secretary General partnered with the World Economic Forum to bring a bunch of corporations and billionaire elite to the table to be able to set policy for how we access food. And this is something that, this is just completely ties us, all of us in together, the global South to the North, because we have corporations and people who don't have to go to work every day and work for $7.25 an hour, deciding how we get our food, deciding what kind of seeds are available for us to be able to grow what type of food. These corporations are pushing farmers and states to abandon nutritional, traditional polycultures and focus on monoculture fields of imported corn seed. And this is a huge problem that affects all of us. I think that for so long, people in the US have been so accustomed to, obviously there's some cases like where I live, I grew up with some people who had some problems, they were poor. It was difficult for them to just go to the store and have their parents buy them whatever fancy $4 box of cereal they wanted. But on a whole, I think US citizens have taken this for granted. The extent to which people in the US have had, quite a bit of access to the sorts of products that people are accustomed to eating, that they prefer to eat. And I think that this is something that is going to get increasingly difficult. There's just the level of poverty in the US is so shocking. We saw it in these kind of memes and online and on social media in response to Venezuela, because of course, after 2017, people were, the right wing was online showing people, supposedly looking for food in dumpsters and people living on the street and people looking, quite badly in Venezuela. And that's what people like, the disingenuous Jorge Ramos of Univision went to go film. But we've seen the exact same scenes, as Kayla said, all over the US. Certainly where I grew up, there's people who, one day live in a car, another day they live on someone's streets. And I think that these are kind of battles that people in the US are going to begin facing increasingly. And, this idea that I think among some people, there exists this idea that the system of imperialism actually trickles down to be able to help people in the global north. But in fact, it doesn't. I mean, there are a number of reasons why I chose not to live in the global north. But one of the reasons is that there's simply, not the sort of opportunities that everyone thinks there are, certainly not the opportunities that, people who are in Peru, who are in Bolivia and Venezuela, who say they want to go to the global north to go study and live in the US. Those opportunities are not necessarily true. And of course, we've seen those in those videos, where people are driving down the road and see a lot of homeless people lining the streets. And it's not just in California, New York, it's all around the US. And so I think people need to, I think they are becoming more aware of, the limits to which people are, benefiting from these sorts of things in the US, because like you guys said, there's still high levels of poverty and crime, sorts of crimes that I haven't even seen here or around Latin America. There's very specific crimes in the US, largely related to drug and substance abuse. Obviously, low wage exploitative work. I think all of us have experienced that. When I was a teenager, I worked all sorts of horrible jobs that I'm grateful I don't have to work any longer. Just under horrible conditions, even just like a restaurant can be quite bad. Obviously, with relation to Afghanistan, the military, and getting sucked into enrolling at age 17, so that the day you turn 18, you can be part of the military. And the way in which people see that, especially where I grew up, a lot of the guys that I grew up with saw that as their only possible opportunity, the best opportunity they had. I didn't grow up with people who went to university at all. That was not even an option. And they come from a line of people who've never been to university, and that's just, the military was definitely the best thing for them. And of course, with that, they become participants in terrorism and terrorists themselves when they go abroad. And then of course, like related to, the issue of substance abuse, there's also domestic abuse, domestic violence, violence against women. We hear so much about femicide in the global South and in Latin America and specific countries like Central America. Like, I don't know, people talk about these things all the time, how women don't have rights, but violence against women is a very serious problem in the United States, especially because of all the issues, again, with drug use, because this is a nation full of addicts. And it's very scary, and people don't frame it or speak about it in that way. Also, just the huge amounts of debt that people live with in the United States. People just live off credit cards and loans. Mass incarceration, particularly of, the Native and Black communities, all of these problems specifically for those communities, but also for white communities as well. Homelessness, of course, and just the limitations to the public education system and the health system. I mean, the numbers of ways in which, people in the United States in terms of health and education are behind compared to countries like Nicaragua and Cuba are just, it's unbelievable. It's like we can't even compare the systems.
Very, very well said. I absolutely agree with you 100%. I think it's really interesting too that you brought up the opioid. Wow, I can't find any of my words today. The opioid crisis, because if we look back at China and the opium wars and the British history of colonialism, opium in Afghanistan, it feels like it's been such a slower pace for the violence that imperialism brings around the world happening to the working class here. You said trickle down. That's Reaganomics, right? Like, that's not working for us. Trickle down economics doesn't work. That's literally imperialism, siphoning the wealth from the working class here at home, but also around the world. Workers of the world unite does not mean, let the workers in the global south do all the work. That's not what that means at all. That's backwards. That's almost like racist in my opinion. It's like, let all the brown people in the south do all the work. And fuck that. We need to be in solidarity with workers everywhere, but we also need to recognize that life kind of sucks here. I worked at Starbucks, and there was one year that I worked full time, and I didn't even take home $10,000 that year. That's not life. That's not life. I didn't get healthcare until I was 24 years old because I was a university student, and I was still working full time. That's not learning. That's not, how can we make a better future for ourselves if we have to go into massive amounts of debt, or even sign away our life to the military? So that, no, that's not, those aren't benefits to society. This framing that we're privileged almost is problematic in my opinion, because it's not a privilege that people are suffering. Where's the privilege in that? I'm not suffering, so I'm just lucky, right? But we're still suffering in a lot of ways, and that's always been true. People have always suffered in the United States. There's always been class struggle. New York is the model for Chicago and Austin, Texas right now, in terms of rapid gentrification and homelessness. I can't drive around or take transit anywhere in Chicago without seeing homeless people and tent cities all over the place. I was just visiting family in Austin, and they're like, my family is surprised. Oh, there's all these homeless people now. And well, imagine that. Silicon Valley is moving to Austin, Texas. So you're going to see that massive class divide where the corporations decide to set foot. They would not be able to afford their house now if they moved to Austin, a few years ago. But if they moved there now, they wouldn't be able to afford it. And they're not making the connections between capitalism and foreign policy and the city. But they're very patriotic people. They love their country. Half of my family has been through the military. One of my cousins, thankfully, has not been in Afghanistan. He was in Afghanistan, but he's stateside now, and they love their country. You know, they want a better future for everyone. So when you hear things like patriotic socialism, how is that, like, what comes across your mind? Like, all three of you have lived in the United States and in the global South. What comes to your mind when you hear patriotic socialism? Why should Americans not only be socialists but also stop this aggressive, destructive behavior? Let's start with Camila this time.
Yeah, we have to make revolution where you are, and that's extremely important. I don't expect 300 million plus people to get up from where they are and where they've spent their whole lives and go out and seek another life in the global South or back in Europe or wherever, if they even know where their roots are. It seems very unlikely that everyone, apart from the native population, will be able to find their way out and find a life elsewhere. And I think that people in the global South, especially in popular organizations and parties, they want to see people in the U.S. organizing, building, learning what the issues are that we all deal with because we all live under the same system, and fighting for change. And whether it would be through an existing party, which obviously it can't be, or through new parties and movements, it's very important to take popular power in the U.S. And I think the idea of patriotism is so important to us in Latin America, because obviously we know that the most unpatriotic people are the people who want to sell our everything, our sovereignty, our lands, our resources to the U.S., to foreign actors, to corporations, to the highest bidder. If it's like a member of the local oligarchy wants to sweep everything up, they want to, totally dissolve and do away with our traditional and indigenous cultures, and and we've had to fight really hard to try to protect our institutions, our everything that has been grown from our countries. And I think equally in the U.S., I think Ariaza, who is now the former foreign minister, there's a new foreign minister of Venezuela, and President Nicolas Maduro. I mean, they always praise the United States for its cultural contributions to our world, and the Cuban government authorities as well. It's just been so important to us in the global South, especially in Brazil. I've heard so many people, Black Brazilians, talk to me about how the civil rights movement in the U.S. and the Black leaders of the last century had such an impression on them, and how important it is, given all the experiences they have dealing with racism in their own country, and discrimination and disenfranchisement and poverty and everything else, and how they take inspiration from that. And I think there's just so much to be proud of and to build on, because the U.S. has its own revolutionary history, its own parties, its own movements, and these are just things that everyone needs to learn about, just in the way in which revolutionary movements and indigenous uprisings can have the tendency to kind of disappear, or have people try to disappear them, and have us lose sight of where we came from and the struggles we came from here in Latin America. It's very important that those stories and things are kept alive in the United States, and that these organizations come together and build something there based on your own conditions and your own experiences and the things that you're dealing with, and not necessarily trying to carbon copy something that's happening in the South. So I think you guys can speak better to this, because of course I haven't been in the US for over 5 years. But so I think, your guys' experiences are equally, really interesting and important. And we like hearing about it as well.
Yeah, exactly. You bring up a really good point. I mean, we do have a revolutionary history here in the United States, but that's often scrubbed out of our history books and out of our like if there's like ever any kind of like movies or anything produced about our history, that's all scrubbed out. Like the fact that there was a Marxist brigade in the in Lincoln's army again, during the Civil War, we never hear about that. Like Marxism, like socialism is as American as apple pie, I guess you could say. We have a really rich history here, and it's really important that we get to people, to the masses with that history, and make them realize that it's always been there's been a socialist history here, and that socialism and patriotism go hand in hand, because we want to save our country, and the imperialists that are in the imperial core here in the United States want to destroy it, because they're the ones who are destroying our jobs and our livelihoods, and they want to sell it to the highest bidder, like you were saying. And we want to put a stop to that, because we want to benefit all the workers here. We want to give our jobs back. We want to have like a right to a job and healthcare and everything else, and to housing. But the imperialists don't want that, because that goes against their interests. Let's move to Kayla with that same topic.
So I just want to say real quick, as many of you know, I surround myself with the Eastern European community. And I remember having this argument with one of my Romanian friends. And I was trying to talk about like why Cuba is a great country. It's a fantastic country. And the first thing I said was, and they have great free healthcare. And he stopped me right there and he was like, this is how I know you're American, because the first thing that you say is they have free healthcare. But it's so true. It's like something like, oh my gosh, they have healthcare. It's something that Romanians and people in the Eastern Bloc have been living with for, decades, and something that we haven't seen. And at least certain cities may have free healthcare programs back in the day, but I've never seen that in my lifetime. My mother hasn't seen that in her lifetime since she's gotten here. I don't know about you, Danny, but it's something that is like so attractive to us. And then one, to Camilla's earlier point, that like, again, with the Eastern European community, I find that you'll speak to people from, I've been to Eastern Europe, and I'll speak to people there, and they'll be so enamored. Oh, you're from the United States. Oh, you're from New York. You're foreign. You're American, and like life must be great. Life must be dandelions. And I talk to the people that actually immigrate here, and my partner's one of them, and we talk about how, I remember, I mean, my husband, he's from Belarus, and he said to me the other day, I mean, maybe months ago, he was like, Belarus is not that bad of a country. And it took him a while to get there, to realize there are things that he got in Belarus that he'll never be able to get in the United States. And that's, because they had a socialist system, and they continue to hold some of those things. And then some of his, our Eastern European friends too, would be like, when I wanted to immigrate to the United States, I thought that life would be amazing. America's so great. And then I get here and I realize that there's a lot of struggle. I've had debates with Venezuelans here, where they'll talk about how, hey, I don't think the US is great either after living here. But then, they go on their escualido stuff. But, all this to say is that people that are like live here and struggle here and work here understand that this country is not perfect, despite the fact that we are patriotic people. I mean, as a country, this is a very patriotic country. But so I'm in the party of communists, as I said before, and we hold the line of proletarian patriotism. That is our line. But what does that mean? Does that mean what Michael Parenti calls the super patriotism that is, espoused by the U.S. government? Unconditional love for your government, stand for your president, stand for your flag, hold on to these false symbols, support our wars, fund our banks and our corporations, when, you eating less and you working more and, surviving on less is what it really means to be American. Is that the patriotism we're talking about? No, not at all. I don't support the nationalism, because that's what it is. It's a chauvinistic, right-wing, reactionary nationalism that does not care about the people. It does not care about the people of this land if it allows them to starve, to go homeless, to go without health care, to go into debt over basic human necessities. That is not patriotism. That is not love for the country. We don't support the genocide of the native people who cultivated this land, who made this country why it's such a beautiful, and this is true, the United States is a beautiful country. The land, its territories, from the Shenandoah Valley, Appalachia, the Catskills, the Rocky Mountains, this is a very beautiful country. But that doesn't mean that we support the crimes that this government has done. If we call ourselves proletarian patriots, that means we're against the system that has birthed all that. We're against that because we love our people. Like Che Guevara says, a revolutionary is guided by feelings of love. I love our people. I love the proletarian, and that includes the international proletariat. But I am from this country, and my job is to build socialism in this country because I love my people, because I want better for my class. And we cannot have that while we have these parasites on our back continuing to steal the fruits of our labor, while also killing people abroad. That's millions of people around the world, 500,000 Iraqi children who died because of US sanctions, 40,000 Venezuelan lives that were lost. These are all crimes against humanity committed by our government, who at the same time are sending our soldiers over there to die, who are breaking contracts that we would benefit from trade with Cuba. We would benefit from trade with Venezuela. It would help us. But we don't get that because the United States government wants to go on their war against these governments that demand to be sovereign. Does it benefit the proletariat here? No. What benefits us is having that interaction with the proletariat, to have that trade, to build more jobs and build more industry. We would benefit off of these things, but we don't get that because of the parasitic government that we have. And so if you're going to we'll call ourselves a patriotic socialists, a patriotic proletarians, proletarian patriotism. All that to say is that we're guided by feelings of love for the class of our country. Because I don't love everybody in this country, all right? I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like Bill Gates. I don't like Jeff Bezos. I think all those motherfuckers can choke. But the people who are here, the people who are in this chat watching, the people who work every day, who struggle every day, or the people who are sitting in those shelters just trying to survive another day, those are my people. Those are the people who deserve better. Those are the people that I care about. And it's a fact. It is a fact that the people, you're not going to go, to anybody and say, hey, you're from the United States, right? This is the only country that you've ever known. This is the only country that your parents have ever known. And let's be honest, that is a majority of the country. And we have to meet our workers where they're at. You can't go up to them and be like, so death to America, fuck your country, you're horrible, you benefit from imperialism, come join my socialist party, let's go, be settler socialist. That's not going to work. They're going to slam the door in your face and say, get out of here, weirdo. You got to meet the masses where they're at and talk to them about some of the things that are most pertinent to them. I saw something online today where there was this piece this guy showed me, and it was just to say that the Americans, they don't care about all those wars, they don't care about the suffering that their country is imposing onto other people. And I reject that, because I don't, for a couple things. I genuinely think, as a communist, I genuinely think that most people are good. Obviously, there's some Ted Bundys around in the world. Most people are good. Most people are just trying to survive. Most people care about their neighbor, they care about their friends, they care about their family, and they just want the best for the world. That's why our media lies to us. That's why our media has to manufacture these wars by saying, oh, look, we need to save the women abroad. If we were like so evil people and we were just like inherently ignorant and awful people, they wouldn't need to do that. But they need to lie to us to manufacture that consent for us to go to war. Oh, we have to save the girls in the Middle East wearing the niqabs and the hijabs. They have to do that. Oh, we have to save the Venezuelans from their evil dictator who's starving them, because people are genuinely good. And if the United States was honest about its intentions, people wouldn't really, they wouldn't really go for that. One. And then what was my second point? Second point. But this is also just to say that people here in this country they're working, they're surviving, they're trying to make ends meet. I'm sorry that not everybody is going to be able to have a conversation about what's going on in Eastern Europe and why the United States has manufactured a fascist revolution in Ukraine when they're trying to think about, how am I getting to work? Am I going to be able to keep this roof over my kids' heads? What are we bringing to the table? Like, that's just not a reality that people are going to be able to do. And that doesn't make them bad people for that. It just makes them people who are thinking about their most immediate needs, their material conditions. And so that's where we bring them in. That's where we bring them in to say, why is it that you live in one of the richest countries in the world and there's no public transportation system? Meanwhile, we're sending billions of dollars to Nazis. Oh, and remember, we fought the Nazis. We fought the Nazis in the 40s. Well, why are we funding Nazis in Israel? And why are we funding Nazis in Ukraine? While you have to send your kids to walk 2 miles to school. Like, those are the types of things that we need to be doing if we are serious about building socialism. And this is where I say sometimes people just want to feed their own ego and be the best friend to the third world, while actively attacking their own working class, looking at their own working class with disdain. If you want to be in solidarity with the international proletariat, it's by building socialism wherever you are and doing everything that you can to do that. And if you live in the West, you do it in the West. If you live it in the global South, you do it in the global South. But that is our job, is to build socialism in our countries and build, workers' movements in with our people. And I think that's what it means to be a proletarian patriot.
Kayla, you ignited fire in me.
That was hot.
That was amazing.
That was hot.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Yes. Let's.
Danny, please give us your thoughts on this topic, and tell us how you feel about patriotic socialism and what that means. You're in Grenada right now. I watched this documentary recently. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, for sure. Super eloquent what Kayla and Camila laid out. At the same time, I think it's important to recognize that indirectly, of course, there are some benefits, like the way Walter Rodney laid out. Every time you look at a skyscraper in New York City, every time you look at the infrastructure of Park Ave, of Madison Ave, and even beyond that, the highway system that exists in whatever conditions, there's a direct connection to the extraction for decades and centuries of labor, of resources from the Ivory Coast and Senegal and South Africa. So I don't think there's any contradiction saying that overall, the working class here doesn't benefit, but of course there's some indirect side benefits, if you will. When Camila laid out that social portrait of where she grew up, that definitely resonated with me. She's talking about my cousins and my siblings and my father and my mother and, the people I love the most. And Kayla spoke to it too. Backward white people. And we're not going to go roll up to them and throw some Karl Marx or Thomas Sankara in their face on the first meeting. And they're going to be talking about how democratic Thomas Jefferson was. And they're going to have their American flags, or 15 or 20 American flag. We can't, as much as I'd like to go up and bury their American flag or burn their American flag and put it in the ash heap of history where it belongs, I don't think the American flag ever represented our people, working people, the downtrodden, the oppressed. I could only imagine that socialist patriotism, patriotic socialism, whatever that means, it would have to be the RBG. It would have to be a revolutionary flag, because every time they bombed Vietnam with napalm, it was with the American flag. Every time they defuturized Salvadorian families and Nicaraguan families in the 1980s, and the El Salvador of today is Syria in the Middle East, and Libya in Northern Africa, it's always done with this symbol, the American flag. So oppressed people can only see the American flag as a Ku Klux Klan hood. How else, objectively speaking? I'm just speaking historically. I'm not even getting into the passion of it. I think, too, we need a new language, language liberation. Every time they bomb another country, every time they invade and occupy and sanction, it's always we, and how many of us walk around the United States? We bombed Iraq, we invaded Afghanistan. What did we do? So we have to draw those clear lines there. I think it's interesting in terms of these patriotic symbols. I've heard the Cuban revolutionaries and Hugo Chavez, when Hugo Chavez came to the Bronx and he came to Manhattan, he would talk about George Washington, and he would talk about Thomas Jefferson, and the CPUSA also did this, coming out of their most revolutionary zenith in the 1930s. And CPUSA would have the Thomas Jefferson, Communist Club on 14th Street. And it's like, Thomas Jefferson was not just a slave owner, he was a slave trader. That was not, from an African American's perspective, indigenous people, women. How could you use Thomas Jefferson as a reference? So I think there's a ton to unpack there. I think Chavez was using that to try to connect with the American people, but you can't go into Harlem or the Bronx talking about no Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. So I think we're always growing, internationally. The term patriotism is a problematic term. It's a term that comes out of masculinity. We don't talk about the matria or the motherland. It's the patria usually. And like nationalism, another, quote unquote quiz question: is nationalism good or bad? Well, Palestinian nationalism is not the same as Trump's white nationalism and white supremacy. And the nationalism of oppressed people and Black nationalism has a revolutionary character intrinsically, but it can also have a reactionary character. So these are deep conversations to unpack. But I think that language liberation is essential. Every day they hit us over the head on CNN and MSNBC, the international community, the United Nations. What is the United Nations? It's the usurper nations. Who are the United Nations? What say does Indonesia have in the UN? What say does the Global South have in the UN? So to keep heightening these contradictions.
Well, thank you, Danny, for sharing that. We there might be some slight disagreements that we have with being like you were saying that the flag might not be salvageable, but I think those of us might think that it is, and I think, like we were saying, we have to meet the people where they're at, and the majority of Americans identify with the flag, and it means something to them because that's all they really have is that flag and the meaning of the flag about what being an American, being an American, and what that means. And I think it means something to the majority of the working class. And I think our flag is being used by, imperialists and, the ruling class in a way that distorts what being an American really, really means. So I think there's some, I think we can salvage the flag for sure. But I don't know what you're gonna say.
I do agree a lot with what you said, though, Danny, because they are. I mean, that's just another example of how our government, which the people have no control over, really in a representative democracy, which is kind of a sham democracy, in my opinion. That they're not representing our interests. The majority of people don't want to send people to war to kill other people for resources. The majority of people want to trade peacefully. And, for me personally, I don't really care what our flag looks like. If we have a revolution and it changes, great. If it stays the same, yeah, we're going to have to talk about what that means for some people and some other nations who see the American flag as an occupying, as a symbol of occupancy and theft of their resources. That's a really good point. And kind of building off of that, there's a comment earlier here that I want to shift to. It says, how would wrong one. Sorry. Okay. apologies if this has been covered already somewhere, but how does proletarian patriotism fit with decolonizing the land of the United States that it sits on? And I want to say, I do think this, a genuine question from somebody watching. Thank you for joining us. I think that the meaning of socialism and communism gets distorted when the very concept of socialism is that we're sharing power, the dictatorship of the proletariat. What does land back mean to a bunch of people who don't own their homes? They have no stake in the cities where they live. They're living in tents under the bridge. Their house is falling apart. If they're lucky to own it, nobody I know owns any land. So part of socialism is transitioning to a system where people have control over the land where they live. A plural nationalist society comes from that. China is a really good example. The USSR is a really good example. There's really great examples in Latin America right now that perhaps all three of our friends can speak to. But I think a lot of people on the synthetic left have this view that the socialist United States is still going to be like some settler colonial dystopia, but socialism and communism is anti-imperialism. It's the name of anti-imperialism. It's the name of sharing things, and that means sharing land and giving land back to disenfranchised people who don't own where they live, who don't have control over their water, who don't have control over their agriculture.
Self-determination.
Exactly. So if we can start with Danny this time, if you want to maybe speak to some of that, speak to what you've seen right now in Grenada, or wherever else you've been. I really appreciate you going into that.
Yeah, 100%. And that brings so much up on the question of decolonization and reparations.
Yes.
Reparations for the Palestinian people, the right to return to their natural homes. Everything that happened in 1948, and of course, the Palestinians of the U.S. Borders are indigenous people who are owed reparations in the form of land and their own self-determining educational system, not a miseducational system that's been kidnapping them now for decades and centuries. And who will the reparations come from? Because it's in the class interest too of the white workers and everybody to have reparations. The reparations don't come from our families who are strung out on opioids in Ohio and across this country. The reparations come from Citibank and Fleet Bank and Chase Manhattan Bank. They come from the bigwigs, the billionaires. And that's where we have to draw those class lines, because the same white workers I'm talking about, when you go into their homes, it's or their apartments, or if they're living in their car, what are they listening to? They're reading the New York Post. They're not reading the New York Times. And they're listening. Fox News is the #1 watch network in America. If you put CNN and MSNBC together, then they have more viewership than Fox, but Fox is #1. So what is Fox feeding them all day, every day? Poison, just poison over and over, to the point where if this is like their first interaction and they're tuned in right now, they're going to say, this dude in Grenada hates the U.S. and he's anti-American, but I've never felt, I couldn't feel more American where I was born and raised in my family. I've never been anti-American. I'm anti-imperialist. So, and that's why I'm here in Grenada, a country of 110,000 people. That's a few city blocks in Chicago or New York City. And in the words of Maurice Bishop, 110,000 people, a small country, but an immense, gigantuan example for humanity. So in 4.5 years, the Grenadian people began to undo colonialism and neocolonialism. All of the peasant committees and women's committees and youth committees, Grenada was a shining star. They stood shoulder to shoulder with Nicaragua and Cuba. It was when Maurice Bishop was visiting Hungary and Czechoslovakia that they began to organize the coup here, both internally and, of course, connected to U.S. intelligence. And why does U.S. intelligence, the CIA, why do they exist? To monitor anyone who dares to have any degree, any modicum of self-determination, of sovereignty, from Syria to all the countries we've laid out. That's why the CIA exists with an undisclosed budget within that $780 billion. And Biden was saying it has to be higher. One could call that anti-patriotism, if you will. So there's a few of my answers, but decolonization, reparations, self-determining education, self-determination for all oppressed nations. I mean, I saw someone ask something about Israel. That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, at this stage, what are you going to start deporting backward white people? You're going to start deporting them, half of them to Ireland and 1/3 of them to Scotland and the other fifth to Finland. I mean, at this point, the United States is not what it was 300 years ago. So I think the two-state solution in Palestine. I mean, these are important conversations to have.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the United States is definitely not what it was 300 years ago. I mean, I think when a lot of people talk about decolonization, I think what they're saying is, deport white people and give the land back to indigenous people. But that's, I think, a backwards take on the issue. Like, that's just not realistic. And, Palestine is another, it's a hard topic. I could definitely give my thoughts on that quickly. And my boyfriend is Syrian, and we talk about this a lot. Right now, Israel is like taking land from Syria, but the whole region used to be there. There was a socialist republic there, and Gaza was part of Egypt. There's a solution that doesn't involve like slaughtering Israelis. Like they live there, but Palestinians deserve their own nation too. I think that it'll be Palestine, and Israelis will live there. That's what it was when they started moving there. It was Palestine. Like that's and they will figure it out. But we've got to stop like bombing the shit out of them and stop giving Israel weapons and money. That's another reason that to prove that imperialism isn't benefiting American workers. That's just, Israel's a really perfect example of that. Every year we give them zillions of dollars, and what do? They genocide people. That's not what people here want. People don't want that. So that was my quick answer on the issue.
Kayla, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so on the original question about proletarian patriotism, and how does that apply to decolonization, I mean, you said it before that we have great examples. We have China and we have the Soviet Union, and I know best the Soviet Union, and I love the way that the Soviet Union was really a great model, and I think we could be very similar in the United States because we have a history just like they did. Russia was an empire. Same was the Polish-Lithuanian Empire that covered lands that now became our Western Belarus and Western Ukraine. And there was Russia took over lands in Central Asia. It took over so much indigenous land that is still like today modern day Russia. It took over the eastern parts of Belarus and Ukraine. It was an empire, and people forget that the Russian Empire was going out, taking land, stealing from people, that these countries that we now know today as Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, Ukraine, they did not exist as their names until 1917, 1918, 1919. They had never before got to be national, like in their own having their own nation state until the Soviet Union. but their nationalities still did exist before. So we have a very similar history as what the United States has done to, I live in I live in New York City, and this is Lenape land. And I'm sure where you're living right now is land that belonged to some indigenous and native group. But the Soviet Union created it was a plurinational state, but it did not say that we're going to create these ethno states and we're going to kick out all the Russians, and you're all gonna do your own little thing as your little ethno state. It would have been a disaster. It never would have been the Soviet Union. It never would have been a country that was able to survive for as long as it did, even though obviously it did dissolve in the end. It would have never been able to survive if they had those insane inter-ethnic conflicts trying to divvy up the land. It's not practical. It doesn't make sense. But what the Soviet Union did do is they created land with conversation of people in those lands, of those nationalities, and created their borders, gave them, the self-determination that they needed. And one of the two things that the Soviet Union did was they created a Soviet. So the word Soviet means advice. It means advice like a council. Advice on nationalities was one branch. So like we have the House of Representatives. They would have the advice, or the Soviet on nationalities, and the other one would be the Soviet on workers. And this is what a truly plurinational socialist state does. It gives representation to people of various industries, and to defend the interests of whatever line of work that they're in. They get to create legislation and policies, and also takes into the account the oppressed nationalities. I mean, Jewish people and Uzbek and Ukrainian people, and these people got their decolonization. They got their reparations through the socialist state, and that's what we need to do in the United States. And so, another saying that comes out of Peru, very interestingly, the translation is, those who work the land shall own it. And I think this is the best, this is a great example of land back. If we understand that, through the socialist state, that we collectively have a proletarian dictatorship, we collectively own this state because we are proletarian people, not the rich that owns, because that's what it is right now. It's not just all white people that are owning it. It's not all this. It's a class of people that are owning the land, and that class of people is multinational. It's multi-gender. It's multi-ethnic, but they're the ones that are owning the land. We're going to do the same thing here, but it's going to be the masses of people, and that means we're going to collectively own the land. Whether you're Native, you're Black, you're Hispanic, if you are somebody that is a proletarian person that works on this land, this country is yours and it belongs to you. And we give reparations through the socialist state. That, to me, that is what decolonization is. And I think that these phrases like land back and decolonization now, I mean, they're great. They have great intentions, but what do you mean by that? I think that a lot of people who just say that don't really understand what they mean by that, because through the socialist state, all of that is possible. It's not that, okay, well, we're the United States now, and that's it. We're just going to continue doing everything that the United States did, but say it's like that just doesn't make any sense. And as to the question of Palestine and Israel, as you said before, Fox, I think that as it would be Palestine with this, multiple ethnicities, multiple nationalities. And it's not just, Jewish people or Palestinian people or Arab people. There's Ethiopians, there's Africans, there's various different groups of people that are also living in this land that will be Palestine, and it will be plurinational, it will be multinational, multi-ethnic, and they will live, together. But ultimately, that is the future that they have to take themselves. I'm from the United States, and I can only have an opinion, but that is another complex situation with a different set of conditions that I couldn't tell you what their socialist future is going to be, but I can tell you that it'll be Palestine again, and it'll be multi-ethnic, it'll be plurinational.
Right, and I think a lot of people have like a utopian idea of like what socialism needs to look like, or they just have a really incorrect idea of what socialism is. This is a science. It's not a religion. It's not. We're not going around predicting what things are going to look like and how they should be. We have to look at the conditions and take those into account. And a lot of people think, especially on the synthetic left, a lot of ultras think that like somehow the United States is the only place in the world that's ever had settler colonialism. That's the only empire that ever existed. A lot of countries, especially in Latin America, have this history too. There's settler colonialism all over the damn place. That's not unique to the United States. And the United States has not been the only empire in the world. And a lot of these countries are now socialist states. Okay. So we have a similar history, so that means we can have a socialist revolution here in America. And because since it's, this is the belly of the beast, that would only benefit the global proletariat as well, not just workers here at home, but everywhere. So I think people need to come around to the idea that socialism is possible here in America, and it would be with American characteristics. It's not going to be copy and paste China, the Soviet Union, or whatever. It's going to be our own unique form of it. And that's what people need to understand, because it's a science. It's not a utopian idea. There's a science to this whole thing.
Camila, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I know that it's actually been quite sensitive in the past when I have made declarations about, about people in the U.S. And I think that people have this idea that, I don't know, perhaps that we hate people in the U.S. or that, our movements and revolutions are superior in the global South or in Latin America. And of course, that's not the case, and no one thinks that. And I think, like the whole idea is that that beginning somewhere, you'll have to eventually build a mass movement that includes all sorts of people across all sorts of lines. And this is, it seems like it's a very daunting and even impossible task, but it's, what has happened in other places, including here in Bolivia. And in Bolivia, of course, the majority are indigenous people, different indigenous peoples of different, what they call, nationalities. But so many of them came together to form the mass and, to fight the earlier struggles against neoliberalism, against dictatorship and repression, and against the DEA and the U.S. presence in Bolivia. And, the party, when these movements went from being, campesino and indigenous peoples movements to a party, there had already been reading groups and study groups of, European people of European ancestry who were also studying revolutionary texts and, doing their own organizing and their own forms of resistance where they were. And many of them were from the city. And we call them, in Spanish, everyone calls them professionals, right? That's what Evo calls them, professionals, because there's this idea that, like, once you get a bachelor's degree, it's like you're a licenciada, it's like a title, like, having a bachelor's degree means that you go on to get a professional job, supposedly, and you don't have to, like, work the fields or whatever. But, so many people who are professionals in the city are part of, this mass movement, which is the movement towards socialism. And this has been, it's absolutely terrifying for the oligarchy that there's people like Alvaro Garcia Linera and Lucho Arce, the president, and all these other people who were ministers under the, Evo's government, who, came together at the drop of a hat to govern over a country and to push forward these nationalization projects to be able to, create the income necessary to fund these social programs and better the quality of life for every sector and every community of the entire country. So it was something that that happened. I don't want to say naturally, but it required people to understand that whether someone is part of this professional class in La Paz, or whether they are from traditional coca growing communities in the Tropico where we are, that they have more in common, more alike than not. And that sort of process will have to be followed in the US too. And I think it's possible.
Camila, we think it's possible too. And it's refreshing to hear so much optimism coming from all of you. I think we know too many people who are despairing right now, and there's a lot to despair about. But people are organizing all over the world. There have been so many victories for the left in Latin America. Even socialist projects that have been overthrown, those are still victories. Those are still proof that people can win. But the struggle continues. We've got all of you are really, really amazing. You do really amazing work. What kind of questions do you have for each other right now? You haven't gotten a chance to pick each other's brains yet. Danny, go for it. I saw you unmuted your mic.
Yeah, I think a lot of these conversations are dialectical. I guess we could go back to that indirect benefits. I just don't think it would be genuine to say that white workers don't indirectly benefit in different ways from white supremacy, racism, though, of course, overall, they don't benefit. So I don't know, for Kayla and Camila, do you think the American flag could ever be redeemed in a people's socialist Soviets of the United States?
Well, you said something that, kind of makes sense to me, that this US flag, it is a flag that doesn't really represent us because we've never had a government that actually represented its working people. And that's an argument. I mean, personally, as Fox was saying before, this is the flag that the people see themselves with, whether or not it's true or not, because it's not true, but whether or not that, that's the flag that they see themselves with. And that's the flag of my country. And I'm, it is what it is. We could change it in the future, as the Cubans have done. They changed the color of their flag to be a little bit lighter. One of the things I talk about a lot too is how with the Belarusians, they have their revolutionary flag, which I have painted over here in my room, but they have their revolutionary flag, which is the green and red flag with the vishvanka. It's a traditional Belarusian pattern on the side, and usually a hammer and sickle. That's the revolutionary flag. And then they have their anti-communist fascist flag, which is coming out of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire. You can see how, and then the Venezuelans as well, Chavez added an extra star to their flag. So, that's a conversation, but I don't think that it's a conversation that's relevant right now because we're trying to build socialism. Maybe we can get there one day. Maybe our children can have that conversation and they'll decide through a popular referendum, what are we going to do with our flag? Are we going to keep our flag? Are we going to change it? Because it's true. You did say that there's a lot of, it's not that this flag particularly created any blood, but this is a flag that has, been stamped on occupations. This is a flag that had been stormed in through, wars and coup d'etats, and that's very real. And how people, see the American people, how they see our country, and versus, does this flag really represent us? I don't know. But do I hate this flag? Do I want to burn this flag? No. And honestly, I'm not really concerned with the flag, but I think that a lot of American people do care about their flag. They do wave their flag in front of their house, and then there'll be multinational people. It'll be black, white, Hispanic families. Go to El Paso, Texas. You'll see the American flag still. That's just how people are in this country, and we have to respect that and meet them where they're at. So I don't condone like the burning or anything. Do I think it could be saved? It's not really up to me. I don't really have much of an opinion on it, but I do think that as long as we're building socialism, our future is bright, and whatever flag that we decide to take up, we better live up to it. And through a socialist state, we will live up to it.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like it's not particularly for me to weigh on and weigh in on, but for me, it has a particularly strong negative connotation just in general. It's very difficult to get past that. When in July, I was in San Salvador for Pride with my friends, and the US Embassy had a massive float, had like the nicest vehicles with everybody standing on the back of the pickup beds, which were probably Fords, of course, brand new Ford pickup trucks. And it was a massive pride march with all sorts of organizations, but just to see all the US flags like really put a damper on things for me because, well, obviously I know what the US is doing right now in El Salvador. And it was just really infuriating for myself and the block I was with. But I think apart from that, I've had a lot of experiences in other countries, like in Brazil with the MST, where we have these, big assemblies or místicas or whatever it is, where people come together and they display their flag. Often people will come with both their country's flag and their organization. And I think it's just so powerful. And actually on my personal account, Camila Press, is like the background is when I was at the MST's formation school, the Florestan Fernandez, and Lula was speaking to us. And, you see all the flags there of Venezuela and other countries just lined up. And I do think it is really important for, people to come together under one banner. And I do think that, there's just so much pride, connected to these symbols. And it's just so important to be able to go to these international or internationalist events and have that. It's been very powerful in many instances, in many places. And I think that it would be really great if people in the US could attend something like that, because this actually happened during, that event and that time. I was there for a couple months, and there were people there from the US. There was a comrade from Cooperation Jackson. There was a friend of mine who's from Mexico, but she's also from Los Angeles, and she works with Code Pink specifically on immigration and border issues. And there were people from Left Roots, from other organizations in the US. And actually, all of them are anti-imperialists with very good politics, but from a range of small organizations. And I remember that conversation about how we had all these comrades who were from other parts of Brazil, from the MST, of course, from Venezuela. They're part of the youth of the PSUV, of all these different movements from Paraguay, Mexico. And everyone would bring out their flag, as well as their organization flag, which is largely like a campesina organization. And then the US people would be like, we don't really have a flag. Like, also people would have like chants according to their own country that they would do. Everyone would stand up and be like, oh, we're the group from, from Colombia or whatever. Or, they would do a presentation together talking about what are, giving a contextual analysis about their own country and some of the experiences and the struggles that a lot of the popular movements are going through in their country. And I think that, a lot of times, like for the example of Venezuela, we would have people from 5 or 6 different organizations. They would all come together, form a presentation, stand up. They're from different states of the country and say similar things. And it was just very, they're talking about like all the issues and the imperialist attacks and the sanctions on Venezuela, all the attacks on their president, and the difficulties they're going through. And when the US people came together, it was kind of like, I'm from this group, there's from that group, we don't have a flag, we don't have a common banner, like we do this, it's kind of different from that. And I think it is a little bit tragic and a little bit sad. And so I do think that whether we're to be trying to salvage that flag that I don't like so much, and that many people don't like, and there's a lot of people in the US who don't like that flag as well. But of course, that decision is a collective decision of people in the US. But or something else. I do think it's very important to come together against common banners, slogans. Language is important. The way in which we frame things is important, the way Danny said. And I think it can be a very powerful thing to kind of like own your country, own your struggles, not feel, constantly, these self-attacks that don't really accomplish very much, because we in Latin America, so many people, especially like middle-class people, but absolutely everyone, have so much shame about their country. Like, oh, our education sucks. Like, let's say for El Salvador, for example, people are like, oh, our education sucks. Oh, we don't have good amusement parks. Like, we don't have good malls. You have to go to San Salvador to go to the mall. I mean, just everything is shameful. Like everyone is just always talking about how shitty their country is. And this is in like a lot of different countries. And, you know, everyone's dream is to either go to Spain or go to, you know, because then they don't have to learn another language, or go to the US. And I think it is good to have that kind of, to have a healthy amount of pride, of, you know, these, like I said before, the accomplishments of those revolutionary leaders in US history, and those struggles, and hopefully you all can find a banner to come under together.
I really appreciate all you had to say, because I do feel similar here. As a U.S. citizen, I feel really, you know, I find myself thinking, God, I hate this country sometimes, and I'm so embarrassed when I go abroad. Like I can't believe this is where I come from. Like it really is just so terrible. So like I studied abroad a while ago in Germany, and people were always like, "What is your country doing now?" Like it's really frustrating to always feel like you have to answer for the crimes of the ruling class, and I think that's what being a socialist is all about. It is confronting that head on and saying, no, this does not represent the people, you know, our people. And you know, I'm with you all on that. I don't think, you know, my top priority is now what colors our flag. But I do care about how people view us, and I do care to challenge imperialism. And Danny, I want to give you a moment to respond to Kayla and Camila before we wrap up. So please give us your thoughts on that.
No, I think their responses were right on point. I don't think it's the most pressing issue. As we say in recovery, resentment is the number one offender. And I think you can tell the resentment for me, it just radiates out towards everything that represents imperialism. And I mean, Grenada teaches us, no matter how numerically small, I mean, this is an island that 45 minutes you'll be in the north of Grenada from St. George's. I mean, it's not the top 10 tiniest countries in the world, but it's, you know, it has honorable mention as number 14 or 15. But the U.S. will stop at anything, any people. Doesn't matter what language, what part of the world. The U.S. is going to monitor every, even I say it, when I say the U.S., I mean the ruling class, I mean the bourgeoisie, I mean the elites, I mean the power structure, I mean the class enemy. When I mean U.S. intelligence, they're going to monitor any movement within China that they can use against the Chinese state and the Chinese Communist Party. And that's what we're witnessing right now in Cuba. This is, again, David versus Goliath. And young people today in Cuba, they were born and raised in the special period where the Cuban peso is worth 1/25 of the US dollar, where maybe you had to hustle to survive and eat because of these genocidal sanctions. And maybe you had to hustle in Havana with tourists who had euros and dollars. And the US knows there's a certain generational challenge in Cuba. And they're taking advantage of that. And then they come the Marco Rubios and the Rick Scott's talking about, we're going to set up free Cuba, free internet for the poor Cubans, and the hypocrisy, the shamefacedness.
Meanwhile, 35% of people don't have access to the internet here. Fun fact.
Exactly. And when it's been the U.S. that's done everything to prevent the Cubans and Venezuelans from having Zoom. The U.S. banned Zoom in Cuba. Now here they come off the coast of Cuba as another excuse to encircle Cuba because they want to give them internet. I mean, the moral hypocrisy this week in Afghanistan, after how many hundreds of thousands of foreign troops have defuturized how many millions of Afghans. Now they're the saviors. And every day we've saved 58,000. Tomorrow, well, it's going to be up to 63,000. And then you cut across from Breitbart and Newsmax, and I think it's important for us to look at the fascist headlines, the far-right headlines, because that's what's shaping our people's consciousness. So if we can't predict and understand how they're mismolding and miseducating, we're going to be stuck far behind. And now this is all, Biden's fault. They want to erase 20 years of occupation. And then to take it back to one of the questions that I began with, it'd be very interesting. I don't think there's time to answer this tonight, but just to get real, polemical, if the Soviets could go back to 1979 and 1980, would the Soviets again intervene? Notice I don't say invade. I leave it a little bit more ambiguous. And that's a whole conversation to have. That's the whole, you're a tanky and you're a liberal. And those are important conversations. Certainly, the Soviets didn't go in there to set up like Soviet Mickey Mouse sweatshops. The Soviets went in there because there was a certain political revolution in Kabul that stretched across all the different nationalities and languages of Afghanistan. No, it's much more complex. Patriarchy manifests in Afghanistan in different ways, in different tribal societies and languages. But the Soviets didn't go in there the way the U.S. has. That's not to say there weren't excesses. In every revolution, there's excesses. And of course, the class enemy always wants to exaggerate our excesses, whether it's the Cultural Revolution or the Cubans when they assumed power. But they never talk about the excesses of capitalism, which always came into being from hand to foot, soaked in the blood of the oppressed nations.
Exactly. And I think you were kind of touching on how imperialism is becoming more woke now. Like it's becoming like we're coming in there to save women now in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, in the United States, I think the U.S. is like 4%, has like 4% of the women population, but they make up 33% of the prison population here in America. That's ridiculous. Another thing is ridiculous is that what human rights do we have here in America when we don't have basic human rights, a right to housing, a job, education, food, clean water, healthcare, I don't know, maybe a road to walk down on. I don't know. It's like we don't have like basic human rights here. So what human rights do we have here in America? So I think it's just full of hypocrisy. They just want to like distract everyone thinking that we're like this bastion of human rights when we don't have basic rights for the majority of the working class. And that can only change when we change the class character of our government, because our government is captured and controlled by imperialists. And we need to change our imperialist government with a workers' government, and that can only not just benefit the American working class, but the global proletariat as well. So
Absolutely.
I just want to thank you all for joining us. Before we wrap up, just let everyone know where they can find you and keep up with your work.
Yeah. Give us some final thoughts and send off and say goodbye to the lovely people in the chat. Please follow our friends. I dropped all their Twitter handles in the chat. I'm Cadno Bach, by the way, in the chat. That's me. So please find them and follow them. They all do really amazing work. Please, friends. Let's start with Kayla. And then say goodbye.
So you can follow me at Kayla Pop _. And I would also recommend checking out the Party of Communists USA and our line about proletarian patriotism, because we have a line on it. And that's, if you like what I said tonight, you'll like our line on it. And thank you again for having me on. I think no matter what path that we take, we need to make it sure that we're building with our masses and getting really entrenched there, because that's the only road that we're going to take. It's either fascism or socialism, and I'll be damned if fascism wins over my dead body.
Danny.
Yeah, so an honor to work with Camila, Red, Eric, and Kayla as always. Kayla and I have been in the trenches before, all these different struggles. So always an honor. Danny Shaw CUNY, the Twitter handle. And just to express gratitude to all the internationalists and to the sons and daughters of Maurice Bishop, and Julian Fedon, all of the Cimarrones, the Maroons, the escaped slaves here in Grenada. There was a series of rebellions. And Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement talk about how they were so influenced by the Black Power movement coming out of Oakland and Los Angeles and Bunchy Carter and Chicago, Fred Hampton, and the Pan-Caribbeanism that this revolution, that the Grenadian Revolution stood up for. It continues to be an inspiration. It was 38 years ago in October that Maurice Bishop and the leadership of the New Jewel movement was liquidated from internal enemies working hand in glove with the State Department in this undisclosed budget that U.S. intelligence always has access to. Maybe we can post there in the chat some of the best documentaries on the Revo. That's what they call it here, the revolution, the Revo. There's one moving forward that Fox referenced. Great summation of the lessons that this proud nation of 110,000 people taught us with their 4.5-year revolution that did more for the Grenadian masses than how many centuries of French and primarily English colonialism. So in the words of Fred Hampton, I say peace to you if you're willing to fight for peace.
So I think that, you know, if someone were to want to do a thesis now arguing that, you know, that communism and socialism and anti-imperialism is spreading to all parts of the United States, they could easily argue that. And I think that while people in the US love to go on Twitter and online and, you know, cancel each other and debate with each other, it's because of, you know, the spread of these ideas to, you know, so broadly around the U.S. that we're even able to have this conversation. You could have chosen other people to come on to your stream because there's so many people talking about these issues right now. And so, you know, this is just part of a larger articulation that's happening all across the world right now. People are fighting against neoliberalism, and people are coming together, you know, and seeing the common struggles. And this is something that is not, the US is not an exception to that. And this is even taking place within the ranks of the US military, or the people who would be thinking about going into the military, young people, people who grew up in Republican conservative homes, religious people, and just absolutely everywhere. And so I think that's really important to think of the big picture. You know, all of the struggles that we're on the front lines of here in Latin America are just the exact same struggles that everyone is confronting there in the US in one way or another. And I think that's just going to become more and more evident as time goes on. And it's just very, very important as anti-imperialist and whatever it is you consider yourself to be, to remember that our job is to, you know, look at the bigger picture, look at the long term, try to make sense out of confusion, because we're going to be subject to a lot of attacks, a lot of, you know, CIA disinformation campaigns, and it's our job to clarify and not add to the confusion, you know, online and in our organizing and everything we do. So I think the job of the U.S. proletariat is extremely important right now, and I think everyone is a leader. Everyone is a journalist and a communicator as well. I mean, the lines are so blurry. You know, people call myself, you know, maybe Danny, journalists, but I mean, we do the same things that you guys do and everyone watching. Try to make sense of things and try to, you know, set the example for the people in our communities. And so I do think that, you know, the organizing and the struggles in the U.S. are very interesting and will continue to be important going forward. So you can follow us at Calcetro News, on our different social media. And like I said, I'm doing stuff with Livia Campesina. We do a lot of, with Calcetro News, we've had the opportunity to cover a lot of rural and campesino movements. So we'll also be doing a lot of Nicaragua coverage in the months to come, looking towards those November elections.
Thank you so much. We're going to sign off now with a quote from Comrade Asada. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We have nothing to lose but our chains. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
Thank you all so much again. We look forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks, guys. So
Hasta
good
la
to see you guys
victoria.
again.
Bye.
Venceremos.